This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.
And we're live. Welcome to this week's Safer Than Your Average. On the show this week, we have Martin. Martin, if you just want to come in and give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself.
Hi there, Martin Wilshire. I'm the Health and Safety Director for Multiplex Construction. And if you want to commit to watching this, here's the story of an ex-RAF policeman who ended up as Multiplex's Health and Safety Director and actually got on an IOS podcast with Blair Boyd.
Brilliant. Thanks, Martin. So let's go right back to the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your early life, where you grew up.
So I grew up as a forces child. So my father was in the RAF, and I grew up in the Cotswolds in a little town called Witney, which is just west of Oxford. And yeah, we did a lot of moving around. So my father was posted to RAF Waddington, Lincolnshire, in the early 70s, and some early memories of that was, I think we went there in 1976, and the following year it was the Queen's Jubilee. So the Queen came. We had the street party for 1977, and we were at the height of the Cold War at that time. So our married quarter was 2 doors down from the air raid siren on the end of a big telegraph pole. So back in those days, we were on what you called quick reaction alert, basically, which meant that you had to get planes up in the air because the Vulcan bombers were part of the V Force, and obviously that was a nuclear deterrent, and we had a strike capability. So I would wake up sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning as a sort of 6-year-old boy to the sound of an air raid siren and my father thundering down the stairs and going out to work, and then hearing, you know, Rolls-Royce Olympus engines of Vulcans thundering down the runway, which was, you know, it's quite stirring, potent stuff for a 6-year-old. And there was no way when you know, when you'd ask your parents what was going on, they couldn't sugarcoat that stuff, you know. So I grew up pretty quickly knowing about, you know, the world and and what was going on. But no, it was a very sort of potent mix, and a lot of my friends, I think, who lived there around that time and in the RAF ended up joining up at this later in life as well. Yeah.
So if we move forward to your first role then, Martin, was it straight into the RAF from school?
Yeah, it was really. I'd been in the Air Cadets and what have you, and then I went to join the RAF as an officer, as a direct entrant officer. So I studied hard and eventually applied for the officer and aircrew selection. I came 4th out of 45 at the age of 18, and they said reapply in 2 years. So I did exactly the opposite, and I went and joined in the ranks. Started to get my experience from there, really. I went from sixth form college, sort of didn't do very well in my A levels because I was having a bit too much of a good time at the time. Went into the ranks, and then ended up going through my military training, and ended up at RAF Bryce Norton as my first posting. And there was it was an eye-opener. It was because it was the major trooping centre for the UK and still is, to all parts of the globe. It's a very, very big base. But in other scenarios, you have to be a team builder. So if you are particularly in our role, part of our role was to, you know, sort of lead and guide the station guard force. So the station guard force would be made up of aircraft mechanics and RAF regiment gunners and, you know, MT drivers and all sorts of things. And they would all be put together for 7 days on their annual or biannual tour of duty on guard duty on days or nights. So there was you needed to unpack your foot and learn what your full range of interpersonal skills were from the get-go, to make sure you didn't end up with your face caved in, first of all. Because you learned there was a way to talk to people, and a way not to talk to people. And there was definitely a way to deal with difficult situations, which there was a quicker way of diffusing things sensibly than being more confrontational and more aggressive, which would only send everybody upwards into the red mist, and it would just get worse and worse. Some situations that was just going to happen. You know, I got kicked across various tables and, you know, had chairs, you know, wrapped around my head a few times and what have you. But Bryce was an interesting place because it was a melting pot, an absolute melting pot. So we had, and I think they still do have. So it makes it's a hell of a place on a good night, as they say. So we had lots and lots of people play there for us. Back in the day, we had Bernard Manning, we had Chubby Brown, we had Chaz and Dave, and Cannon and Ball. And I'll have a little story about those guys because obviously we lost Bobby Ball recently. The nation lost Bobby Ball recently, and may he rest in peace. But I met him on the gate at RAF Bryce Norton. We had a double bill. So Cannon and Ball and Chaz and Dave were playing at the Spotlight Club, and Chaz and Dave drove into the gate, and the gate at Bryce had just been refurbished and just been reconstructed, really. So there was a big search lanes and lots of parking and everything. And Chaz and Dave's car came round, and there was me and my mate Jeff, and we were both stood there just watching we were there to sort of escort them in, and just watching them come in. And Chaz and Dave were as nice as pie, ever so polite, just parked up quietly, walked in and said, yeah, we're Chaz and Dave, we're one of the acts that's on tonight. Like, they had to explain themselves, like nobody knew who they were, and everybody's going, oh, it's Chaz and Dave, look, they're coming in. So they were no trouble at all. And then we waited about 10-15 minutes, and we're going, Cannon and Ball are cutting it fine, aren't they? And then the next thing you see is a car sort of screaming in towards the gate. Bear in mind, you've got armed guards at the gate, heavily armed guards. This is around about the time of the first Gulf War as well. Yeah. So we're an active station, and the car comes down the search lane, and it turns side on to come in, and you can see Bobby Ball hanging out the window, making the shape of a gun, going, "Get down, you bastards!" Yep. And Jeff's just waving his hands like this. He's just going like this, and I'm starting to wave my hands like that, and just doing the slow down signal and all that stuff. Anyway, so anyway, the car pulls up, and they don't get out, and we walk over to the vehicle, and my mate Jeff, he starts to put it on a little bit, so he walks over to them, and he says, "Evening, gentlemen, what do you think you're playing at?" And he went, "You what, mate? You're right." Like that. I said, "You're right." He said, "No, what do you think you're playing at?" He says, "You got armed guards here. He could have taken you out." And he said, "It's us. It's us. It's Cannon and Ball. It's us. It's Cannon and Ball." And he said, "Yeah, I don't care about that, mate." He's going on. He said, "I don't care about that." He said, "That's armed guards there. You could have got yourself killed. Just remember that, okay?" And they went, "Yeah, all right, yeah. Sorry, mate. Anyway, are you going to let us in then?" And Jeff turns around and goes, "No, you got to go in there, and you got to get a pass." And he turns around. Bobby Ball looks at him, and he said, "I bet Chaz and Dave didn't have to get a pass." And Jeff just turned around and he went, "No, they didn't, because they're good." And fair play. Bobby Ball was fabulous. He was absolutely fabulous. He just cracked up. He got out of the car, and he basically shook our hands, and they both went in and they got a pass. And then Jeff turned around to him and went, "They did get a pass, really." So yeah, that was good. That was really, really good fun. Good fun. Yeah. But there was loads of. I mean, it was a real education, being there particularly. In the early 90s, there were lots of things happening, and so many people used to come through there. So we used to, the Falklands obviously was Bryce was one of the main trooping centres for the Falklands as well. So one of the roles that we used to play down there was we used to do all the air transport security. So we used to operate the rapid scan X-ray machines. We used to do the metal detector arches, and we used to do the bag searches and all of that stuff. All the aviation safety stuff that was required. We used to do all of that. And you'd get various people come through, and people would ask you to sort of, some of the troops would ask you to play tricks on their sergeant major because they planted something in their bag or something like that. So to get to a full screw corporal, really, in the RAF, would typically take people, depending on which trade you were in, would take you roughly sort of 7 or 8 years, generally speaking. I sort of got there in 6, and it was a sort of it's not a difficult. You've got to put the work in to be promoted, but at the same time, it's something whereby you're still a very junior rank, and I basically got 12 months in the investigations office there, which was where I wanted my career to go. Actually, I wanted to become an investigator, a criminal investigator, rather than do the counterintelligence sort of security stuff, really. So that was where it was headed for me, and that's really where, you know, I kind of I sort of honed my skills, you know, carrying out investigations. Even though they're criminal investigations, you can equate that to health and safety and to incident investigations. And it's one of the things I sort of pride myself on, the level of investigative work that I've done since I've come into health and safety, particularly, and how I've gone about doing that, and how it's actually stood me in really good stead for doing it. But, you know, interviewing witnesses is a skill. It's a real skill. It's a real skill, and it's something you have to learn. And there's no better grounding for that than being, you know, a former police officer, or being in the military police, of any military police service, really. Yeah, I kind of forgot your question there. What was it you asked me?
So how long did you serve in the RAF?
So I'm sorry, I was just talking about the 10-year thing, and it was basically when you get promoted, you sign up for an additional length of time. So I signed to do 22 years at that sort of 6-year point, and then very quickly after that, some defence cuts started happening. And those opportunities to specialize, etc., started to disappear or started to shrink significantly. And I'd started thinking, I was offered my commission by my then boss, who sadly was killed later that year in a road traffic accident. But he'd basically offered me my commission. Yeah, absolutely.
How did you find the transition out of the military into civilian life again? Such a long time, 10 years.
I think it was the main culture shock was going from we were kind of, as police, we were sort of used to people, you know, trying to give us a bit of abuse and all that sort of stuff, and because it was actually insubordination was an offence, and you know, where you could lift people for that. I went from the RAF, and I got recruited, first of all, to do, while I was on leave. I was still being paid by the RAF for that final 3 months, but I went and did some work with an installation company, installation contractor that I would end up in a job with, and I was trying to sell insulation for them for 3 months, and they were pretty much saturated. But it was a friend of a friend who was on my opposite shift in the RAF. His wife worked as a contracts manager for that company. I then went and worked for that company, and I think the first month I was selling insulation, I think I made about £40. I think that was not a career for me, to be fair. You know, it was a hard sell in these small villages in the middle of Norfolk. You know, it's very, very tough where there is nowhere to put any insulation in your house anyway. So so that was a challenge. But yeah, actually then going from that to working as a roving supervisor for installation teams, you know, across 3 counties. The challenge there was, you know, the people who employed you thought, oh, he's going to be great. He's going to really whip them into shape. He's going to, you know, do this and go out there and be barking at them and doing all this sort of stuff. Couldn't be further from the truth. I was actually talking to them. Communicating with them, getting to know them, building a relationship, you know, and, you know, that helped enormously with what would later happen, which I would become their contracts manager in the end. And I ran the teams, and I had a really good time for 5 years there. And I think it was at that point where I started to get, I think when you know, with regards to your question, you have enormous, when you come out of the forces, you're very proud, you know, and you see that in every veteran that comes out. They still carry the pride with them, and it's the personal pride and the standards that they have, you know, which drives you to, you know, drives you further, if you like. And that was me really in that role. And I suppose the transition wasn't that difficult for me. It wasn't that difficult for me. I think I just had to, you know, I had to adapt. I don't know whether it's because, you know, I used to deal with a lot of civilians in my job anyway, and we used to do a lot of relationship building with local communities and things like that. We weren't secular, you know, we weren't away from the public for long periods of time, which is possibly how, you know, other units might be. They might be out in the field for long periods of time. They may be in theatre, in operational theatre for long periods of time and away from any kind of public, which means you are only used to interacting with other service personnel. And there is a very different way of communicating and thinking, and the humour is different. And, you know, every aspect of life is slightly different, which makes that transition for others maybe more difficult, But for me, it wasn't a hugely difficult transition. Yeah.
So around 2004, you were contracts manager of the installation install.
So yeah, absolutely. So we'd sort of, and with that pride thing, with being that contracts manager, I had a great mentor, a guy called Jim Campbell, who was an ex section engineer for AMEC. He was a civil engineer, and he was my senior contracts manager, and he taught me. I think he brought me through. I think he taught me the ways of, you know, working in a civilian organisation, and, you know, how to do this and how to do that, and certainly about construction, certainly around the safety side of things, because having done, you know, I was volunteered for a managing safely course when I was in the RAF in my last year, because there was nobody else who really wanted to do it. So they went, right, you're on a managing safely course, get up there. I went, oh, what? And they went, a managing safely course. And I went, right, okay. So I went on that when I was in the Air Force. And then, so I'd been dealing with, you know, potential, you know, aggravated assault case. And the next minute I'm doing a final assessment in a welding shop, looking around, not really knowing much about anything. You know, I'm used to, you know, people with broken noses and, you know, glass hanging out their face and stuff like that. And now I'm dealing with welding gear. It was a different thing. Anyway, back to contracts manager, sort of in the early 2000s, and one of the things that started to happen was we would get a lot of appointments cancelled, or a lot of appointments blown out by the installers, because if they were going to, we used to do domestic properties, we also used to do council contracts. So we used to do large blocks of flats, cherry pickers, all of that stuff, you know, and we also used to do domestic properties as well. So we used to do cavity wall insulation and loft insulation, all that stuff for domestic properties. And all of a sudden, there was you know, there were phone calls from the people who'd stayed in all day to have this work done. They couldn't have it done because the surveyor hadn't, you know, identified that there was a whacking great conservatory on the back, and the guys, you know, were going to have to stand on it to drill the walls above the conservatory. And all of a sudden, this was obviously a significant problem. The biggest problem was they were actually cracking on and standing on the conservatory roofs doing it, and there were people sat in the conservatory when they were doing it sometimes as well. So that was a real problem for me, and obviously I was receiving all of the grief from all of the tenants, and I'm a proud ex-serviceman thinking I don't let people down, it doesn't happen on my watch, etc., etc. So I had to find a way to fix it. Now I could have just got angry and chuck stuff around and everything, but I didn't. I had a really good relationship with a lad called Nick Game, who was the health and safety officer, as they were known at the time, with that particular company, and he and I were talking about it, and together, you know, we sort of came up with the solution, which was we need to teach the surveyors how to survey properties for access problems, as well as for the size of the walls, what type of material, and how much we're going to charge for it. Because then we could build the cost of the access into the price. Then we would be basically looking after the guys. We would be more efficient, etc., etc. So we designed you know, it was the first thing I did of any kind of health and safety, was I designed this training program with Nick's help, called Surveying for Safety. And, you know, we brought all the surveyors in. We actually created a booklet of house types, and, you know, the provided a little booklet with access solutions for different types of outbuilding and what have you, which I'd put together, and we trained it, and we got, you know, an uplift in productivity. Our departmental turnover increased, you know, because of the fact that, and safety was better. You know, safety was better. We still needed to get out there and make sure it was supervised, and the behaviours were, you know, challenging, because there was no real in a business of that size. There was no real discussion about safety. There was at that time, there was no real culture, as it were. It was just, guys, I know how to do this. I've been doing this for 15 years, etc., etc. I'm just going to crack on with it. I don't need your towers. I don't need this. But again, that was another challenge in terms of, you know, talking to the teams, getting them on board, saying, look, you know, the next thing we had to fix was paying them.
Yeah.
Because we weren't paying them. We were paying them the same rate for whether they put the access equipment up or not. So then we had to then look at that and say, look, if we want them to put the access equipment up, we've got to pay them, the rate for putting the access equipment up as well, and so on and so forth. So that was a really, really good learning curve, actually. And it was through that there was a 5-year period in all when I'd gone from doing the supervision into the contracts management, and we'd started changing the way we do things like this. That Nick turned around to me one day and he said, I suppose you want my job, do you? And I said, do you know what? And he said, do you know what? He said, you should consider it, because he said, you're good at it. You're just good at it. You can just see you're good with people. You can just see what needs to be done. And so, I had a bit of a think about it, and then sort of took his advice. So eventually took the NEBOSH, around about 2005, I took my NEBOSH general. And then sort of went out looking for, just went out looking for a health and safety role, a specific health and safety role. And I had a bad experience, because I went and got a bit of a contract job, first of all, being a coordinator for a ticket, for a rail franchise for installing ticket machines. And I was working with a team who were run by effectively a sole trader, if you like. So it was basically a guy on his own who recruited people as a contractor. And I think that was with Alfred McAlpine at the time, actually. And it lasted 5 weeks, and then the contract was terminated. So the guy just walked in one day and said, contract's terminated for whatever. I didn't know for what reason, but it was, they'd then awarded the contract to a big player. And for the first time in my life, I was unemployed. And I was a bit shell shocked. So I walked out the front of the office and rang Karen, who's my now wife, and just said, I haven't got a job. And she went, oh my God, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to have to do what I need to do. I said, I'm just not used to this. I've never been unemployed, before. So I sort of frantically, fired my CV out to various people, and got a call from a company called the Health and Safety People, a consultancy called the Health and Safety People, THSP as they're now known. And got an interview with a guy called Michael Rimmer, who is an ex-Royal Engineers warrant officer, specialised in demolition and plant. He's a plant instructor as well. Very charismatic guy. Still around. He's not with THSP anymore, but he's still around. He was the consultant director, and he gave me a chance. He gave me a chance, and sort of we started off. I started off being sort of chaperoned by a lad called Chris Ivey, who's now the consultant director. He's quite well known in the industry. He's got a lot of SMEs as clients. I have to name check it, Chris, because he does a phenomenal job with the building mental health, charter, and we're spreading the mental health message through the SMEs and supporting them. He is a fabulous guy. He really is. He's an absolute diamond, and he was another mentor to me when I taught me the ways of being a consultant. He's an asbestos specialist, and we went out and did a little bit of work first of all, and then the call came in, and I was put on Wembley Stadium. I was given to Hollandia Structures to be their health and safety advisor. Still working for THSP as a consultant, but resident on site at Wembley Stadium for that for best part of nearly 2 years actually. And that was a complete learning curve. A massive learning curve. You had everybody there. You had an international workforce, a multinational workforce. You had Multiplex as the principal contractor. You had the unions. You had lots and lots of unions. Very active. And I will always remember walking through the turnstile on my first day and walking down, the concourse to the Multiplex offices, and on the way down there was convener's cabin as you walk past all of them to go onto the stadium. And you sort of learn it's a different environment, a very different environment, and it was another complete learning curve for me, certainly. But fabulous, really interesting couple of years, and again, all of these things, they all become part of that patchwork quilt that develops who you are. you know, over time. All of these things develop who you are as a person and who you are as a professional. And they're great learning curves. They really are. Yeah.
Okay, so that was your kind of foray into that. So can you take us through the rest of the steps in your career then that led you to Multiplex?
So, okay, so it's quite fortuitous really, because I formed a few relationships with Multiplex when I was working on Wembley Stadium, and I always sort of had an inkling of it was that sort of level of contractor that I aspired to work for, eventually, and I was sort of very early on. I remember, Jim Senior, who was my predecessor at Multiplex. He was the lead health and safety manager for Multiplex on the Wembley Stadium project. And I remember actually writing to him very early on to see if he would be interested in taking me on at any point in the future. And as was sort of usual with Jim, you didn't really hear anything, but you sort of knew it was in the back of his mind somewhere. And also Ashley Muldoon, who was our chief executive, was also the project director at that point for Wembley Stadium. Ash has moved on from the Multiplex business now, but he was there, and various other people actually. So Wembley Stadium came to an end, and I moved back to consultancy, and did some work with some smaller contractors, with a little bit of call center pat testing thrown in for good measure, something I'd never really want to go back to be fair.
Yeah.
You got 3 floors and 800 workstations to get through in 3 days. Thanks very much. Yeah, it's great. It's really good. Thank you. No disrespect to any pat testers out there, but it's just not for me. It's not my bag. So yeah, absolutely. So it was actually during some of that consultancy work that I went and I was covering some projects for John Sisk. So I ended up, I found out there was a vacancy at Sisk for a health and safety manager, health and safety advisor, as it were. And I spoke to the site manager on this particular job at Paddington, and next thing I'm getting called up for an interview, etc. And yeah, we had the interview, and the next thing you know, I got a call, and that was my next adventure, if you like. And that was good. That was good. The nice company, nice company, family-run business. Good sort of tight-knit groups of site teams that knew each other very well. Everybody knew everybody in the company. It was a very nice place to work, and there was lots of opportunity to improve. They were a good mid-tier contractor. They'd been in the UK for 25 years. They've been in Ireland for over 150 years. And we were sort of like the junior element of the business. But there were some great people there, and I've thoroughly enjoyed my time there. So that was 8 years or so there, and then sort of gradually I was looking more towards, looking outwards, thinking, what's next really, what's going to happen. And then one day I got the call from Multiplex, from Jim Senior, funnily enough, and asked me if I was interested in coming over to Multiplex. So that was the next step. So I joined Multiplex in 2015, and went from there. I'd gone from being a regional health and safety manager to going back onto a project, and it was a conscious decision really. I just thought, what I could just do with getting back into a project-based environment, because I hadn't really had a project-based environment since I'd been on projects every single day, but I hadn't had a project of my own to call my own, to run in my way with the project director. So it was exciting to get into that, and particularly with the scale of the work that Multiplex do, that was very exciting as well. I was excited by that, because we do some very complex structures that this exciting stuff it is, and I'm very excited and very proud to be at Multiplex now. And it was just a natural way of things that sort of from 2015 I sort of made my way from working on one particular project, ended up probably the pinnacle of my career for me in terms of projects was the 22 Bishopsgate project, which is the second tallest building in Europe right now. Won't be for long, obviously, but it's on the north side of the Thames, so it's technically taller than the Shard because it's, you know, the ground is higher, you know. So, but there we go. But that was a fabulous experience. That was a truly fabulous experience. You know, we had some trials and tribulations on there. It was a very long job because it sort of kicked off as another project back in 2008. It was known as the Pinnacle. Then we had the financial crash, and then, you know, things changed, and eventually, you know, we got back on it. I think in 2016, I think is when we got back into it as it was at that point as 22 Bishopsgate. So went over there sort of a couple of years ago. Worked with a fabulous team, and it really was a great experience, and it was a real opportunity to really, you know, to put together all of the learning that I'd gathered over my years, you know, working through construction, working from those early days as a contract supervisor at the insulation company all the way through that career, to really, you know, put everything into this project to get people to feel, you know, really safe, really respected, you know, really appreciated and valued, noticed, listened to, trusted and relied upon, you know, every worker on that job to feel that way. And I knew that would improve the performance, you know, more than anything else. I was reading somebody's website today, and there was a quote on there that said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It was some famous phrase by Drucker, I think it is, that said that. And I thought, yeah, well, do you know what? It does. You know, it's kind of, it's like a bit of a flippant line, I think, to some degree, but because you do need both. But actually, I've always said the same thing. You know, historically we've spent so much time looking over the heads of the workforce and looking at the balance sheet and the program on the wall at the back of the room, and ignoring the soft squidgy things in front of us that actually build the thing. And actually, you know, there is an old phrase which says the score takes care of itself if you do everything else right. And if you do invest in the people that are building your job, truly invest in them, truly take an interest in them, truly engage with them, you know, properly get, you know, get the relationship going with them so that they will feel comfortable, they will feel transparent. They do not bat an eyelid at coming to you and telling you things that trouble them, things that are worrying them, things that are in their way, things that are a problem. And in doing that, you foster a culture of community on a project. And if you can foster a culture of community on a project, then people will help each other out. And I don't mean there's no method statement for this, but we're helping each out anyway. I mean, can you just shift this, mate? Because, you know, I need to get over there. That's all right. Oh, I met you the other week at that thing we did for the Black Hats and all of that stuff. You know, it's self-generating, and it perpetuates itself. And in all honesty, that is the reason why I think we delivered 22 Bishopsgate, you know, as safely as we did. We went above and beyond. We wanted to give them the greatest facilities that we could. You know, we put a Barbers in there. You know, we put a Barbers in there. We put a gym in there. We did all of that stuff. And I know that that's probably been done elsewhere as well. But interestingly, we had a visit from another company that's owned by Brookfield Asset Management, and they're called Turner Construction, and they're in the States, and they do some huge jobs in New York. And it was interesting because they came over to see us, and we showed them the barber shop where we had the barber and the apprentice. It was part of our Section 106 agreement for communities. We had an apprentice in there and a barber as well, and they were blown away by that, absolutely blown away. And it was interesting, on LinkedIn about a year later, I saw one of their projects in New York, and there were guys sitting there waiting to get their hair cut, you know, and I just thought that's just absolutely brilliant. That's so good. You know, I just thought that's fantastic. That really is, you know, people grasping the nettle to just, you know, do that and make that difference and provide people with an environment where, yeah, it might be a construction site, but, you know, why does it have to be brutal and rough and ready? Why does there have to be, you know, a slippery floor, mud on the floor? Why does that have to be there? You know, why can't you have, you know, plants in the site office. Why can't you, why can't you do that? That kind of thing. So it's about pushing the boundaries and really providing the best place to work that you can. And that's really been my agenda, and will be my agenda for for as long as I do this job.
It's very much the multiplex way of things, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm obviously working, and representing an organisation that already, places a lot of emphasis on that anyway. But it's just taking it probably from there, just up to there, really. And we want everybody that works on our projects to just feel absolutely welcome and comfortable. They want to come to work. That's the most important thing. They want to come to work. They therefore want to go out onto the floors, and they want to do the best that they can do. And if we do that, then we improve. Engaging the right behaviours becomes much more straightforward. It becomes more learned behaviour, rather than things you have to tell people to do and sheep dip them into behavioural safety and all of that stuff. And it really is just about the basics of treating people well, really well. All of those things.
Definitely. I still refer back to some of my early career working on a multiplex project in Glasgow. I saw innovations there that I still don't see in construction sites to this day. Some of the things I saw there, I was like, wow, the way that the union were engaged, the union convened a training budget that they could allocate training to develop people on the project, paid for by the principal contractor. That's the first time I'd ever seen that. So the union guys all love the principal contractor.
There you go.
I've got 6 guys through their thumb. It's fantastic. And the union members feel like they're getting value for their through.
I think, do you know what though? I think even thinking back to Wembley Stadium, I wasn't overly familiar with dealing with unions. Obviously, coming from the forces, particularly, I wasn't overly familiar with dealing with the unions at all.
The experiences that I had on a multiplex project, and some of the project team that I was working with had been out to visit the project that I had worked on before I worked with that business, and they were saying, "Oh, it was great," and we were asking them, "What makes you different?" And they were saying, "Well, take a look around the site. What do you see here that's different?" The hot food canteen on site, that people were being well looked after. You had huge big locker rooms with showers, and the lockers set out so that you could have your clean gear in one locker and your dirty PPE in the other one, and washing facilities and all that kind of stuff. That was one of the first projects that I saw that on. Way back in the day, and it was one it really set me up. I still refer to some of the experiences I had there now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is, and it is about, the devil really is in the detail with those things, and certainly with building 22 Bishopsgate as well, the next level for us is that I think the 22 Bishopsgate project was one of the first buildings to have to satisfy the International Well standard. For a building that's built for well-being predominantly, and we've taken that and put that into what we call our Better Workspaces standard. So that is the standard that we create site offices and accommodation for now. There is a standard to build them to, and that standard is certificated by a sustainability team. So you've got all the safety aspects in there, but you've got all the sustainability aspects in there as well. So you get either a 4-star or a 5-star, amenities space, because you've got plants, you've got, as you say, you've got 2 types of changing facility, etc., etc., and all the things that go with it. Which is, you've got, not on every project, but we just encourage people to have a well-being space, a well-being room. On our Chelsea Barracks project, we set up a calm area, which was basically a garden. So it was a little garden, a walled garden for people, where you could just go and sit, and you could just have a nice place to just pause and reflect, and just do what you want, just look at your phone, whatever it is you want to do, just chill out a bit. And that for me is what it's all about. Actually, it's yes, you go and do your work, but between when you take a break, you want to go somewhere which isn't sleeping in the locker room, in the changing room. It's not sleeping. It's not sitting in a noisy canteen where people haven't got enough room to walk past you, on the aisles, and they're bumping your shoulder every 5 minutes. It's absolutely not about that. It's not about cramming people in, like livestock into an area. It's about, where would you want to work, Mr. Manager? If when you get out of bed in the morning and you get into your site office, I bet you're not, struggling for space, the way some of the guys on the canteen are. So let's look at it from that side and say, what would you want? What would you want to, where would you want to work? And that's how we got to think, and for me, it's about breaking down the old attitudes of there's management and there's workforce, because we're doing it together.
It's a team delivery.
We deliver as a team. It's one team for us. And giving people the right facilities, giving people the best facilities we can give them, it speaks volumes in that respect. It really does. It really does. And we get really good feedback. And we've stopped putting management teams in basements as well. Because how on earth can you spend 2 years of your life going to work with no natural light every single day, with God knows what flying around in the air? That's just not the way to build a thriving, humming, buzzing team of people who are charged up, wanting to give the best every day. That is the absolute opposite. You put plants down there, they die. That's so people are not far behind, right? So
So if we move on a little bit, Martin, can you tell us a little bit more about your role that you're in now, what a kind of typical day looks like, how you set yourself up for the day?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so at the moment, the day looks pretty much like COVID, for quite a lot of the day, to be honest. But typically speaking, in my role as the health and safety director at Multiplex, a typical day normally starts with, at the moment, it's a Teams call with my team from around the projects. We just update each other on what's going on. It's a little bit of a well-being check as well, to see what's happening. We get the various team members updating people on what's what, deal with anything that needs to be dealt with, or anything that needs to be discussed. And if there's any breakout from that, we can break off and discuss that later on. Then generally speaking, it's generally meetings, or it is at the moment there's a little bit of work going on around just updating the COVID arrangements and what have you. So there's a lot of work around that sort of stuff. Then there's generally a management call on one of the days. So there's a management call every day, and that's between our Europe operations team and actually the exec team as well, which I sit on both. So we have a call 3 times a week, and that's with some of the key project leaders as well, so they can tell us what's going on. They can tell us what's happening, so that all the other business matters, like cash and securing securing various elements of work and what have you, that's all part of the same thing. So we sit on those meetings. Then there's generally some discussion around COVID matters as well. And we're tracking the numbers. We are tracking the rise in London particularly. Like for example, today I've been on a call with Dr. Chris Pugh of Jura Diamond, and we've been talking about what else can we do? What else can we do? Everybody's looking for that. That next thing. We're all worried about outbreaks, particularly within the projects. Particularly, we're worried about a loss of productivity because of the outbreaks. We're worried about the risk to people, etc. And it's just about doing the right thing. About making sure that we're doing the right thing and looking for new ways of doing it. So that takes up a little bit of time. At the moment, particularly, we've got the business improvement plan for 2021. So it's about getting that off the ground. So there's other aspects to that as well. So there's another element to our One Life, One Team program, which we're designing at the moment for sort of mid 2021, which revolves around engagement and behaviours particularly. So we're looking at some aspects of that. Then there's a meeting. We are involved with the HSE on the Discovering Safety program at the moment. So there's a lot of work going into the BIM risk library at the moment. So I'm working with the digital team on the BIM risk library, which is quite interesting. That's using safety-based software to obviously pin all the hazards and the treatments onto the model particularly. And the question is on that is how we can get people to interact with the model. How can we get construction teams to actually properly interact with that model and make that risk register work for them and make it live particularly. And then it's a call around the teams at the moment. We're all staying at home, but I'm actually providing support. I'm basing myself a couple of days a week in head office, because I live in East Northamptonshire, and actually the office is in central London. So, you know, I'm more comfortable being closer to the projects, to be honest with you. And obviously that obviously helps supporting the teams. If they need any support or any help, I can actually grab my stuff and go out to one of the projects and lend a hand if needs be, in terms of whatever it may be, you know, if it's looking at things or whatever it may be, really. So yeah, it's quite a full-on day, to be honest with you. There's lots and lots of things to do. You know, we're running an ongoing graduate program as well. So there's all of those other things. There's, you know, changes to that that sort of never fails to surprise you in some way, or you know, you deal with those incidents, and without, I'm not going to go into too much detail about them, but really I think when you have a very, very serious incident on a project which is life-changing for somebody or worse, you know, and I haven't had anything like that in Multiplex, but in my past sort of career along the line, I've had those things happen, and some things where people weren't injured, but there were some big things that went wrong. Those are generally the biggest challenges, and you kind of, you know, you always know that when, you know, you're working with a really sort of solid regional director, and you know, they get to that particular site before you do, you know, and the police are already there, type of thing, and you're signing in, you know, they've rung you and they've said, I need to sign in through a cordon, what do I do? And they're the director. That's when you know it's really, really serious. You know, and they just, it's almost like there's a freeze there. They don't really know, you know, what to do. That's the stuff that's the most challenging, really. And it's really difficult for everybody to deal with that kind of situation, because nothing really prepares you for it. Because everybody is in the same boat. The onlookers, the witnesses, all of those people are. There's a mixture of, in one particular instance, it was a plant-related accident. So it was a mobile plant-related accident that somebody had been run over, and the animosity, you know, towards the driver, and the driver actually, you know, didn't see, you know, the person, particularly for whatever reason. Won't go into detail, but dealing with that kind of thing, dealing with then the fallout between the subcontractor and the principal contractor, and the way in which you have to sort of finesse those situations, particularly with regards to, you know, legal representation from either side and those people getting involved. You know, I've had a, you know, an unpleasant experience that I've learned a lot from, you know, from where you have, you know, legal briefs turning up for example, the subcontractor would openly give you all of their, you know, all of their witnesses, and you would take all of their statements and all of that sort of stuff, and you try and build those relationships and what have you. And then all of a sudden, you know, a legal brief is appointed for the principal contractor, and then they walk in and tell the subcontractor they're not getting anything. You know, and then the next thing you know, it's kind of, you know, they hit the roof. You know, they get very, very angry. They think that we've duped them into giving us the information, etc., etc. Yeah, that was tough. That was tough, because then what happened was, it was me and the project team that was involved in that particular incident that really were discredited, really, by you know, by the fact that had happened. We were then not trusted anymore. It made the job of investigating twice as difficult. The relationship was gone between us and the contractor. This was a sort of less than halfway through the project. You know, this was very, very damaging for everybody involved. And it was something where you just had to take the learning from that, you know, straight away. Aside from the learning from the incident itself, actually the learning from how you actually deal with a situation like that. And where all parties, maintaining the relationship between all parties in doing that, is something that I have learned a lot from. I must admit. And so, yes, definitely, those situations are the most challenging. They're probably the most difficult to manage as well. And you do have to, you know, have one eye on, you know, we talk an awful lot about, you know, the positive side of, you know, investigating what's good, not just concentrating on the bad all the time. Why do things go well? You know, the engagement side of it, the positivity, etc. You've always got to have one eye on that sort of distant thunder at a picnic, you know, that kind of stuff, because that's what it is. because it's we work in a dangerous industry. We make it safe, but we work in a fundamentally dangerous industry.
Yeah.
And we need to be prepared not only for what happens, but to be able to deal with all aspects of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did as a sort of as an outcome of the mental health agenda at Multiplex particularly, is we put together something called a critical debrief team. So what that is, essentially, we very sadly had somebody took their own life on one of our projects in 2018, and they were a very well liked member of the site team. It was a forklift driver who'd been working for that company for years, and for them to be able to download what they'd seen. They'd been through a traumatic incident. So from that point, we have the assistance of a great psychotherapist, a guy called Gary Owen, who runs his own practice up in Edinburgh. And I think we came to know him through the Glasgow and Edinburgh hospitals projects particularly. And we were talking with him some years ago, and he sort of suggested to us that what's a really good idea at that point is you get the main people who are involved to and you go through a 6-step process when you talk to the key witnesses, and in that way there's 2 things that can come from that. Immediately, people have the opportunity to express what's happened, how they feel about it, but you can also then, if you're given a bit of training, you can then identify the people who then need further support and assistance, the people who are going to be suffering the most. And that's something that we do, and we run regular updates. I'm part of the debriefing team. There's always generally 2 of us if anything like that is to happen, and we've done it as well for things like resuscitation incidents. I actually was the other side of the table in 2018 myself. Was it 2018? It might have been earlier. It might have been 2017 actually. Thinking about it, I was involved in a resuscitation incident with a chap who'd collapsed in the canteen, and he was not in a good way, and he just used a defibrillator, etc. And afterwards, Gary came to the site and he did this incident debriefing with me. I'd never seen it before. I was just a member of the site team, and we hadn't really seen it, but it really helped. It really got people talking. And we've used it subsequently on another resuscitation incident that's happened, I think, last year. A bit. I think preparedness, those challenges. Everybody will. I think anybody watching this who's been through something similar or worse in respect to what I was talking about a few minutes ago with that plant accident. I'm sure they'll relate to that. I'm sure they'll relate to the difficulties of managing the various parties as well. And I think the more prepared that you can be in that respect, then the less of a challenge that situation becomes. And that's massively important, to have a really, really good crisis management plan, for those sorts of incidents, to know what to do. And then for businesses to know, how to deal with the aftermath of that. There's lots of, all companies have got legal advice, and they've got lawyers, etc. And they're very good these days, obviously, at helping us with that kind of a professional specialist advice in terms of, dealing with the aftermath of things like that. But the other side of it is taking another look at the mental impact of what happens, and actually being prepared to run things like those debriefs. It's not counselling as such. It is a debrief. And Gary's always very clear to say it isn't counselling. It is a debrief. And then if people do need to seek further support and they need to be signposted to further support, then that's exactly what should happen, and that process gives that opportunity for that to happen as well.
Excellent, you've got that in place as well. Like, I had Kayla on the podcast a few months ago, Kayla Bergeron, who survived 9/11.
Oh, right.
Said that when they evacuated the towers and she got out, she managed to flag down a police car, and she was a director of public affairs.
Yeah.
She managed to get to New Jersey and go to the Port Authority's building in New Jersey, and she just began working again. And
Really?
while she
Wow.
was vacating from the Tibbles, she was working on her BlackBerry, sending out communications and well escaping from the Tibbles, but they had no debrief whatsoever.
Yeah.
And she didn't realise until probably 6 or 7 years later,
Yeah.
she started to have a bit of creep with the PTSD, and she knew something wasn't quite right, but she couldn't put her finger on it and was dampening it with alcohol quite a lot.
Wow.
So having that in place, you don't know the impact that could have further on down the line with someone.
Yep,
so you're
absolutely. Yeah.
right at the start when they need the help.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. Vital. And it's something that, you know, we, you know, as I say, we just continue to run through periodically. You know, we do it, you know, we do regular, so that we don't forget how to do it, because you never know when you're going to get the call to say. It may not be anything, you know, huge. It may be something, you know, where people might have seen. Well, I say that it might be something that's happened outside the site. It may be that a cyclist has been, you know, knocked over or something like that. It might be something where we might need to have a chat with a few of the traffic marshals or something, you know, just to see if they're okay about what they've seen, and if not, then, you know, we're there to lend that support particularly. And again, it's all part of that same message, is that look, you know, you are, you know, the most important part of this project is the people who work on it, and we need to look after you. You know, we really need to look after you in every respect, and we can't ignore it. If somebody's seen something which, you know, even if it's not life-changing, it's something that's enough to, you know, cause them, you know, mental discomfort, as I would call it, you know, then we need to be careful. We need to be mindful of that. Absolutely. And we need to look after people. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. Okay, moving on from there. What advice would you give to someone starting out in health and safety today?
So I looked at your notes earlier, and I typed this very eloquent piece. And then I was sat here about 10 minutes ago thinking that he's going to ask me that in a minute, and I can't remember what I wrote. So I will refer to it a little bit. But I remember reading SHP or some magazine a long time ago, and there was this eminent professional interview with this. I have no idea who it was, but they said, make sure it's what you want to do. And I thought, I agree with that, but that's got quite an ominous undertone, and it does give the impression that there's no escape and the door's going to slam behind you, you know, when you decide to do it. So I would probably rephrase it and say something along the lines of, it's really about how you can influence others, right? Yeah. The modern health and safety professional is a business improvement specialist, you know. So it's more important than ever that we balance the need to have robust processes in place and that they're being implemented with the learning from what's going well. And I would say to people, don't spend all your time focusing on preparing for a worst case scenario, even though I've just talked about it at length. Don't spend all your time doing that, you know, and don't focus your management arrangements and what you do on bolstering your legal defense as a company. All right. Because if it's there, it should do that anyway. The more we focus on building relationships with suppliers, clients, and most importantly, making our workforce feel respected, welcomed, and valued, the less likely it is we'll need that defense, because safe attitudes and good quality work is far more likely to follow on. You know, so I would say to people, work on being a great communicator and a powerful influencer. You know, be self-aware and seek self-improvement in these areas. If you're not getting the traction, you know. Seek self-awareness to understand why not, and be self-aware in those situations. And for God's sake, use your charisma. You know, if you've got some charisma, use it. You know, there's no sense in hiding it away. Be authentic, be approachable, have fun with it, and you'll bring people with you, right? You know, you're going to face some very tense, stressful, and frustrating situations. But the outcome is down to how you handle yourself and others at the time. And some of the finest people I've worked with in the profession, and still continue to work with in the profession, continue to do all of those things.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for that, Martin. I've actually got a note, and I like to write wee notes in the front of my diary, which goes everywhere with me. And one of my notes is E plus R equals O. Event plus response equals outcome.
Correct. Absolutely.
There we go.
Yes.
Thought you'd
Yeah.
like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is it. That's
So,
absolutely it.
Thank you very much on behalf of the viewers and listeners of the Safer Than Your Average podcast for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yep. Thank you.
This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.